Evening everybody, welcome again to Wednesdays at 8, our regular meeting place. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I'm just looking at the comments, see who's in. Hi Liz, first in, thanks for joining us. Hi Matt, hi Amy, if you're with Matt. Hi Andy, hi Maggie. God, I can't believe Steve has actually abandoned me for football. I'll have a word with that man. I'll let him off. It is quite a monumental week for me and him in terms of football. Hi Simon, hi Justine, thank you very much for joining. So a slightly different show this week. We're kind of coming to the end of the road really. It's the second last show. Got a couple of little things to play you tonight. We'll see if it works out or not. I'm not very good with the technology. So tonight's primarily we're going to be talking about Abbey Road, but I thought before we did that we'd just talk a little bit about at the very beginning. We talked about Let It Be on the very first show, and while that was all going on and they were kind of all despising each other, in the meantime the film Yellow Submarine had come out and was a rip-roaring success. So in February 1969 an album came out, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine album, and people liked it, but they kind of said it wasn't great value for money because there's only actually 4 new Beatles songs on it. There was also Yellow Submarine itself and All You Need Is Love. And side 2 was entirely orchestral. It was George Martin's effectively film soundtrack, orchestra soundtrack. So people felt a bit kind of grudging about having to buy a whole album just to get 4 new songs, but you know, that's just the way it is. But of course it did fine and did great. And I'm mentioning it here tonight, even though we're mainly looking at Abbey Road, because one of the songs on there I used to sing to my kids when they were very small. I used to sing it to them at bedtime, and for whatever reason they used to really enjoy it. So I thought we'd play one song off Yellow Submarine, if you're all alright with that. Hi Leslie, thanks for joining. So I'm going to do one song from Yellow Submarine. It's a kid's song, and it actually appears at the end of the film. The whole film is animated apart from a very small section at the end where the Beatles themselves appear. And they say, you know, like, oh no, balloon meanies have been spotted in this theatre. What do we do? We need to go out. And John says, we go out singing, and they all start singing this song. So it is a kid's song. It's quite short, and boy does it leave me out of breath because there's no room to actually catch your breath in it. So this is a song called All Together Now. This is for my kids. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can I have a little more? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I love you. A, B, C, D. Can I bring my friend to tea? E, F, G, H, I, J. I love you. Bom, 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 bom. Sail the ship. Bom, bom, bom. Chop the tree. Bom, bom, bom. Skip the rope. Bom, bom, bom. Look at me. All together now, 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 all together now. Black, white, green, red. Can I take my friend to bed? Green, brown, yellow, orange and blue. I love you. All together now, 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 all together now. Bom, 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 bom. Sail the ship. Bom, bom, bom. Chop the tree. Bom, bom, bom. Skip the rope. Bom, bom, bom. Look at me. All together now, all together now, all together now, all together now. All together now, 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 all together now. So as that's for my children, that was All Together Now. It takes me back lots of years. Don't know if anyone even knows that song, but my kids certainly do. And not going to say much more about Yellow Submarine other than it was reissued, I think in the about year 2000 or something like that. with that cover, and that was actually a full whole load of Beatles songs. So it had all the Yellow Submarine songs on, and a few other Beatle hits as well. And they just completely abandoned the orchestral score. And you still find both of them out there. Simon, you forgot about that one. Yeah. Charlotte likes that one. Oh, that's good, Andy. I'm glad you know it. That's cool. So let's move on then to Abbey Road. So they'd done Let It Be. They tried to do the recordings for Let It Be, which was going to be called Get Back. It was all very acrimonious. They walked away and thought, we hate each other. We're never going to do anything ever again. And then Paul said, look, let's do one more album. We can't end, with something horrific, with that kind of bad blood. So he called George Martin and said, look, can we do another album, and will you produce it for us? Because George walked away from the Get Back sessions. And George Martin said, well, I will produce it, but you've got to do it like we used to do it. And effectively I'm in charge of the production. And they all went along with it. And excuse me, recording started actually as early as February for a couple of the songs, and then they kind of left it for a couple of months, and it kind of really got recorded over summer. And from what you read about it, actually it was a fairly harmonious time. There was still a bit of acrimony in there, but actually they really kind of got on all right. They focused on the record. There's a lot of speculation as to, did they know this was going to be the last record or not? And I'm going to play a video a bit later where you can see there's definitely a different view from different members of the band as whether that's the case. And it's now got a pretty kind of world famous album cover, one of the kind of classic pieces of pop art, which I'm sure you all recognise. And that also came about because originally they were going to call the album Everest, because it was just a brand of cigarettes that someone in the studio smoked, and they quite liked the look of the logo on these things, and they were going to have their picture taken, at the base of Mount Everest and stuff. But a bit like with Let It Be, they kind of thought, we can't be bothered with that. So somebody suggested, no one really knows who. Paul says it was his idea. Jeff Emmerich, the engineer, suggested it was his idea they should actually just call the album Abbey Road. And just go outside and take a picture on the zebra crossing. So whatever, that's what came to pass. And the back cover of the album looks like that. And in fact, the actual Abbey Road sign has been nicked loads of times over the years, so I think it's now been placed somewhere high up so you can't actually get to it. I was there in September last year, go to London a lot with work, and I never actually had been to Abbey Road, despite my kind of Beatles fascination over all these years. So I went, and of course, it's, as I said at my gig in January, it's full mainly of angry motorists because they can't get past because there's so many people wanting to take their picture on the crossing. But fair enough, it's now, and in fact the crossing and the studios themselves have been given sort of grade 2 listed heritage or something, so they can't do anything with them. So hey ho. So I'm going to sort of rattle through a few songs from the album. The song opens with a song by John, who did it as a campaign for a guy called Timothy Leary, a kind of hippie guru from the 60s. And I was just reading, I hadn't realised he started writing a song for Timothy, who was actually putting himself up against Ronald Reagan at the time as, I think, California governor. But then he got busted for LSD and marijuana, so that campaign lasted about 5 seconds. But John still had this song, so he finished it off, and he got the idea. The first line he got from an old Chuck Berry song, and I just need to tune my guitar down. Close enough. So I wrote another one of John's nonsense songs, so I'll do that for now. This opens the album. I'm sure you all know it. Shoot. 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 Here come old flat top, he come moving up slowly. He got juju eyeball, he won't holy roller. He got hair down to his knee, got to be a joker, he just do what he please. He wear no shoes and he got toe jam football. He got monkey finger, he shoot Coca-Cola. He say, I know you, you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me. He bad production, he got walrus gumbo, he got on no sideboard, he want spinal cracker, he got feet down below his knee. Hold you in his armchair, you can feel his disease. Come together right now over me. He roller coaster, he got early warning, he got muddy water, he want mojo filter, he say one is three. Got to be good looking cause he's so hard to see. And come together right now, come together right now. Come together right now over me. So that's Come Together. Well, that's one of Leslie's favourite songs, actually. It's probably her favourite Beatles song, I'd say. I can see the cheesy grin there, Leslie. And Andy, you can play that, great. Hope you tune it down to drop D. Do it properly. And Chuck Berry, not one to miss an opportunity, when he saw that Lennon had taken the first line of the song from one of his songs, immediately sued him. And they kind of settled out of court, and what they did was Lennon agreed to perform 3 Chuck Berry songs on a rock and roll album he'd planned to do at some point in the future. And that's what he did. In 1975 he brought out an album called Rock and Roll, which was all old rock and roll standards, and 3 of Chuck's songs were on that, so I'm sure Chuck made a pretty penny from the royalties from that. And Come Together was released as a single, as a double A side. Actually it only got to number 4 in the UK, and the reason for that probably is that it was the first single ever the Beatles released that was already on an album of theirs. So sometimes, like back when we did Revolver, Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine came out as a single and then was on the album when the album came out later. But this time around, people who had bought the album already had the tracks, so they weren't necessarily going to buy the single. So there's the album. It was a 10-minute photo shoot, and taken by a guy whose name I can't remember. For some reason I think it's Ian MacDonald, but that doesn't quite sound right, but it might be. And there's a few outtakes that are out there. Here's a few alternate album covers that didn't quite make it. Slightly different angle. They all look like they're slightly weirdly dressed then. And actually my favourite picture from the whole of the sessions is this, where they were just having a little break, and a little old lady chatting to them there, probably complaining about the length of their hair in 1969, but who knows. But that's quite a cool picture. I don't know. Remember me telling you when we did Sergeant Pepper last week, this theory that Paul is dead. You know, he died in a car crash, and they're finding clues everywhere. Well, they said the Abbey Road cover was a whole load more clues as well. So here's some things. First of all, they reckon that's a funeral procession with John as the churchman, Ringo's the undertaker, Paul is barefoot, so for some reason that makes him the actual deceased, and George at the back is the grave digger. And there's a car behind George, and guess what, it's a Beatle, and the number plate of that car is ends with 28, it's actually 281F, but the conspiracy theorists said that stands for 28 if, and that's how old Paul McCartney would have been if he'd been alive. So there you go, it must be true then. So let's move back to the music. Just come out of that. So the second track on the album is also the double A side of the Come Together single, and this is George's song. He wrote this actually during the back end of the White Album and presented it to the guys during those early Let It Be sessions, but they didn't seem very interested in it. Even George Martin wasn't interested in it. But they ended up recording it, and in the end all four Beatles said it was the best song on the album, and it was something. And it went on to become, you know, kind of well covered, something like the 5th most covered song in the world or something. And Frank Sinatra used to play it regularly. First of all, they annoyed George because he said it was a Lennon and McCartney song, so he wasn't happy about that. But he was soon corrected, and he called it the greatest love song ever written in the last 50 to 100 years, so that's high praise indeed. And I thought it's such a nice song that I'd like to do it, but it really needs backing. And I had an old backing track for it somewhere, so I thought I'd play along to a backing track. And I tested it out, and it kind of failed dismally. When I did it, I played along on the acoustic guitar, and it sounded all right. And when I played back the test, there was latency. So actually the actual backing track and the guitar were out of sync. So I thought, well, maybe I should just plug the backing track into my audio interface that I've got in front of me here. I tried that using an old iPod, and that was really tinny. And then tried it again with a second laptop, and that was really tinny as well. So I didn't want to give up. So what I thought I'd do instead is I've actually just this afternoon, yesterday, just recorded a version of me playing to the backing track. So that I'd play that instead. I know it's not live, but I'm sure you forgive me this once. So this is me singing to the backing track, and it's me on the guitar. It's just a one-take thing, so warts and all. But it is just a phenomenal song, and it's just the actual structure of it. You know, as an amateur songwriter, it just blows me away. It's sort of complicated and yet simple as well. So I'll just share my screen. Bear with me. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this. I'm sure you'll shout out in the comments if you can't hear it. So this is me doing a quick version of Something Yesterday. Something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover. Something in the way she moves me. I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in her. Somewhere in the smile she knows that I don't need no other lover. Something in her style that shows me don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in her. Asking me, will my love grow? I don't know, I don't know. You stick around, now it may show. I don't know, to do is think of her. Something in the things she shows me. I don't want to leave her now. You know I'm leaving her. So there we go, Something, yeah, great song. And you're quite right, Andy, that was for Patty, his wife at the time. And George kind of denied it a bit later, but you know, we're fairly sure it is for Patty. Quite often there's a lot of revisionism goes on afterwards, isn't there? And yeah, and Eric and the Eric Clapton wrote Layla for her as well. He was absolutely besotted with Patty and did everything he could to try and effectively woo her from George, and eventually he married her quite late, actually in the late 70s, but it didn't last very long. George seemed to be fully aware that this was going on and didn't really seem to have an issue with it, so it's slightly weird. I always found that slightly odd, but hey ho, he was pretty laid back, was George. So back to the album, and actually I haven't got many pictures here. I've only got one more to show you, which is inevitably it came out in a deluxe edition with a book, and only 4 CDs this time. You know, getting a bit lapsed, the Beatles. You know, there was about 11 CDs with Sgt. Pepper. But when they decided how to do the album, I always find it slightly weird because John was always a bit kind of, you know, what's the word? Difficult, I suppose, is probably the best way to describe it. And he kind of was getting into his own songwriting and said that he should have all his songs on side 1 and all McCartney's on side 2. Hi Steve, thanks for the score. Thanks for listening, Steve. I know you're probably having to kind of focus on 2 things at the minute, no problem. So yeah, John wanted side 1 to be his and Paul to be his, and then they kind of changed their mind, and Paul wanted to do this medley that him and George Martin had in mind of clipping together little bits of songs they had, and they had a sequence that would work quite well. And John was less keen on that. He said, well, okay, we'll do that, but I want side 1 to be, you know, whole songs, complete songs, or what he called rock and roll. So that's how the compromise that came, that side 1 is John's side in terms of concept, and it's all individual songs, and side 2 is mainly Paul's, and with a big long medley at the end. And we have Octopus's Garden on side 1, which was Ringo's song, although George had quite a lot to do with the writing of that. There was also Maxwell's Silver Hammer from Paul, which they all hated because Paul was a perfectionist, was desperate for it to be a single, and nobody else wanted it to be a single. And actually the Beatles had a rule, which was, you know, they either all 4 voted for it or it didn't happen. If 3 out of 4 liked it, but the 4th said no, then it just didn't happen. So it never became a single. And then side 2 has 2 or 3 songs, individual songs, and then this big medley, but it opens with another George song, and this is where George is really flourishing as a songwriter. And he was getting a bit bored of all the Apple business affairs. He hated having to go to meetings and sign papers and be a businessman. He just wanted to be a musician. So he was due at an Apple meeting, but instead he sagged off and went to Eric Clapton's house, and they just it was a nice spring day, and winter had just kind of had really been a bad winter, so he was happy just to sit in the garden with a guitar, and both of them started writing songs, and George and Eric both wrote a song, and George's song is just really, really good. George wrote Here Comes the Sun, and Eric wrote a song for Cream called Badge, which have very similar kind of guitar styles, particularly in the middle. So I thought I would have a go at Here Comes the Sun. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, do-do-do. Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. Little darling, the smiles returning to their faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, do-do-do. Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I see that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, do-do-do. Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. Here comes the sun, do-do-do. Here comes the sun, I say, it's alright. It's alright. So there you go. Here comes the sun. Another really good George song. Excuse me. So I talked about that medley. I'm going to have a stab at a bit of it later. But I thought at this point we'd have a little pause, because we're kind of at the end of the story of when they were a band here. So I found a video, I'm going to play it to you. It's about 5 minutes long, so bear with it. But this is the Beatles themselves talking about the end of the road, about the bad bit of Let It Be and Abbey Road. And you can tell, actually, that the quotes from John and George, they're kind of glad to be out of it. George and Ringo and Paul, not quite so. And the footage at the end of this, with the four of them in a field, is the last time they were ever together, other than for the odd business meeting, all four of them. So quite poignant. So have a look at this. If you're watching it on playback, it might not be here, because I've got an awful feeling that YouTube will tell me that I have to take this video and strip it out of the stream for copyright reasons. But since we're live, we can have a look at it now. So this is the Beatles talking about the end of the band. Bear with me while I just get it ready to share. I'm going to put it in full screen, and we'll come back and I'll do another song, or another set of songs, and then we'll talk about the final show next week. So here we go.
We couldn't play the game anymore. We couldn't do it anymore. It had come to a point where it was no longer creating magic, and the camera sort of being in the room with us made us aware of that it was a phony situation.
In fact, what happened was, when we got in there, we showed how the breakup of a group works. We didn't realize that we were actually sort of breaking up, as it was happening.
Just the same as it was before, the year before, when we were last in the studio. There's a lot of kind of trivia and games that were being played.
Well, I think it shows as an absolute fact that we were going different places, I've mentioned it before, the energy for the Beatles was waning. We put in 1,000%, and then it was dwindling now. You feel like, oh dear, do we have to turn up? We have to do that thing again? I want to do this, and John wants to do that, and George was off. And You know, people would, you know, we had families.
And I remember thinking of it like army buddies. One of the songs we used to love in the past was Wedding Bells. Those wedding bells are breaking up, that old gang of mine. And this idea that you've been army buddies, but one day have to kiss the army goodbye and go and get married and act like normal people. It was a bit like that for the Beatles. We always knew that day had to come. When John hooked up with Yoko so sort of intensely, that was kind of obvious that there could be no looking back after that. You know, I always felt that he had to clear the decks of us in order to give her enough attention.
It takes a lot to live with four people over and over for years and years, which is what we did. And we'd called each other every name under the sun. We'd got to blows. We'd been through the whole damn show. We knew where we're at. We still do. We'd been through the mill together for more than 10 years. You know, we've been through our therapy together many times, you know.
You know, and a lot of days, even with all the craziness, it really works still. Instead of working every day, it worked like 2 days a month. You know, and there were still good days. We were still really close friends. You know. Then it would split off again into some madness.
You know, it was quite obvious that the Beatles became, you know, I mean, the thing that it started out being, it gave us a vehicle to be able to do so much when we were younger, and then we grew right through that. But it got to a point where it was stifling us. There was too much restriction. You know, it had to self-destruct.
There was always a possibility that, you know, we could have carried on. We weren't sitting in the studio saying, okay, this is it. Last record, last track, last take.
But I think at the point we'd finished Abbey Road, it was really, the game was up, you know, and I think we all accepted that.
It was magical. I mean, there were some really loving, caring moments between four people. A hotel room here and there. A really amazing closeness. Just four guys who really loved each other. It was pretty sensational.
You know, they gave their money and they gave their screams, but the Beatles kind of gave their nervous systems, which is, you know, a much more difficult thing to give.
Well, I'm really glad that most of the songs dealt with love, peace, understanding. You know, it really did. If you look back, there's hardly anyone says, go on, kids, tell them all to sod off, leave your parents. It's all you need is love. Oh, John's give peace a chance. There's a very good spirit behind it all.
It's just natural. It's not a great disaster. People keep talking about it as if it's the end of the earth. It's only a rock group that split up. It's nothing important. You know, you have all the old records there if you want to reminisce.
So there we go, from the mouths of the boys themselves. I always feel quite depressed watching that thing. That was all over then. John's probably been slightly underestimating, saying it's just a rock group, it's nothing important, but they certainly had a massive cultural impact. So I want to finish off with a few songs from the end of the medley. I was going to do one song from the medley, and Leslie heard me playing it and said, you should do some of the others, just try and do the rest of the end of the medley. I said, well, let's lead guitar and stuff. But she can be very persuasive. So I've done a version without any of the lead. So I'm going to do the medley from the end of Abbey Road. And the final song on Abbey Road, certainly if you look at the back cover, it's called The End. You know, so... And the final line is, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Just seemed like a very fitting end to the Beatles story in terms of while they were a band. So let's have a go at this medley. And if you recognise the first song in the medley, by the way, it was used by John Lewis a couple of years ago as their Christmas advert, sung by Guy Garvey of Elbow. Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back home. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby. Golden slumbers fill your eyes, smiles await you when you rise. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby. Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back home. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby. Boy, you're gonna carry that weight a long time. Boy, you're gonna carry that weight a long time. You'll never give me a pillow. You only give me a situation. And in the middle of negotiations, I break down. Boy, I'm gonna carry that weight a Well, that's my go at it anyway. And that's the end of Abbey Road. The end of the show, and kind of the end of the journey for these last 11 weeks in terms of the Beatles history. But we don't want to end on a sad note, do we? So let's do one more show. And I thought what we'd look at next week is what might the next album have been like. Looking at the solo albums from 1970, play a few songs from that and see how far away from the Beatles it is. Well, I don't think it's very far away at all. And then talk about the resurgence, late 80s, 90s, particularly with the Live at the BBC albums and the Anthology project, and the release of 2 new singles for the first time in 25 years. So we'll do that, and then we'll have a look back on everything we've done, get together one more time, and celebrate this fabulous band. Okay? Thanks again for joining me. Thank you, Theo, by the way. I noticed you joined in a little bit later there. If you're still listening, thank you, Theo, for joining me. Thanks, everyone else, for joining me. As always, stay well, stay safe, and let's meet next week one final time. Okay? Until then, bye for now.